Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and I'd like to thank Socialist Alliance and the Green Left for organizing this event. And tonight I am going to speak not as activist, not as academic. I am trying to speak as a human being, and I am trying to reflect my experience in this genocide as a case study, and then we can discuss and analyze the situation like in reality, not just theorizing the genocide. For me, it's easy to talk about just genocide. It is genocide, and I am happy to refute the claims that what happened in Gaza is not genocide, but it's important to talk about things were not appeared in the news. And some people think after the ceasefire, the genocide is stopped. Today, like, I'm trying to reflect my experience when I was like observing, watching the news during the genocide. Like, and because the story is long and I have limited time, so I divided my speech into like 7 chapters. And also I want to begin with words. I will not talking about bombs and rockets, because genocide doesn't begin directly but with bombs alone. It begins with words. And I will try to connect this experience about what happened in Sydney in Australia when the government invited Herzog, and how I am like resisting the genocide as a human being, not as activist. I remember when the Israeli occupation started to prepare for this genocide and started with words. And Isaac Herzog said, it's an entire nation that is responsible. It's not true that civilians are not involved. Let's pause here. When this man said that, he removed civilians from protection. Children are no longer just children. Hospitals are not longer protected spaces. Homes are not longer shelters. This is incitement. And let's discuss that. So when I watched the news and he said that, I remember exactly, directly, I have family in Gaza. My family consists of 8 members. My father and mother, my brother and his wife, and 4 children, and all of them were in one house. And when he said that, I understood that this green line to the army to bomb everywhere. So I was worried so much. I was thinking this will be so dangerous. In any time I can hear bad news about my family. Then Gallant, he was the minister of Israeli army, said, we are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. And then he ordered no electricity, no water, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. They were policy. And then food was cut, water was cut, and I understand my father was sick, he is old, and he lives on medicine. So this means my father will die sooner or later. So I was waiting bad news, and then after I was thinking what we can do. This is a question. But I am in Sydney, I can't do anything. But I know that my family will be killed. Because genocide means that they want to eliminate eliminate the people in Gaza. They eliminate everyone, no protection for anyone, and my family will be a part of this elimination. And no water, no food, and then I remember I received a call from my brother in the morning, and he told me, "How are you? How have you been?" I told him, "Please tell me the bad news. I know something bad. Tell me. It's not important how I am now." And he told me, "Your father lost his life now, passed away." It was the worst news I heard in all my life. Terrible, terrible experience. After that, I remember when Herzog was signing his name on the rockets later, and he was filmed signing rockets that later fell on homes, on civilians, on family, and then the outcome, tens of thousands were killed, among of them my family. My brother, his name Ihab, he is a physiotherapist. His wife is a doctor. His father-in-law is a doctor too, and he has 4 children. All of them killed. All of them, but we don't know where are their bodies. And my mother was alone in Gaza. And then I started to resist the idea of to be killed in this war and to evacuate her. For 2 years trying to evacuate, but I failed because she was waiting to find the bodies of my family. And just here, let's to think. They deny this genocide. When you are talking about 8 members, all of them killed and 1 be survived. This what? What can we describe that? And then I am trying to evacuate her and still searching for the bodies of my family in order to bury them with dignity. But still we didn't know their bodies. After I succeeded to evacuate my mother, I was thinking the problem now is solved, but I found myself there is a new era of resisting the death because my mother came here, she was so sick and her weight was like 39, has psychological problems. Every day my life became like taking her from doctor to another. This exhausted me financially, physically. My life, it changed. My research interrupted. I can't continue my PhD. I can't find have ability to work as other people. So this is another type of resistance because I trying to rescue my mother because I was worried because all my family killed. Now, during that, Australia as a government invited Herzog. And I was shocked when I heard that. This man, he is one of the leaders who is responsible about the tragedy of my people and my family. And then, instead to Australia as a country signed agreement against the genocide, it is supposed to start steps to support human rights, not to receive someone. He was inciting the genocide. And then I said, I want to oppose that. I want to resist that. So I wrote a complaint. I sent to the government, but I haven't received anything. No one even replied me. or acknowledge that they receive complaint. Okay, later, when I went to the rally in order to oppose this visit, I saw terrible things. The police attacking protesters, even they are old, they are not like do anything except they wanted to say no for this visit. Just they wanted to say we are against this visit without forming anything. They didn't like attack or do anything. So I was shocked when they attacked people. How I resist? Directly, I wrote some articles in order to uncover the truth about what happened. And when I am writing, I was thinking how I can access wide audience, because I know mainstreams will not accept to describe what happened in Gaza as resistance. So I published article in Green Left is always supporting and give the people to speak, but I publish in The Guardian, the article wrote about why I am opposing this visit. And also I wrote in The Greens, and we are still fighting the oppression and the attempts of Australia to restrict the freedom of speech and the right of protests. And they wanted us to change what we saw, the facts. They wanted to say this is not genocide. So what do you want to say? Is it war? There are two armies are fighting each other? That's not the truth. And now, for us, in this meeting, I think we can have some good conclusions to see how to continue our resistance against the genocide. For me, I have a plan, as I said, as a human being. For activists, they can also contribute to fight. But the good news that despite all the restrictions, we found tens of thousands in Australia went out. They were not afraid, and they challenged the government, and they said, we don't accept this oppression. We don't accept to invite criminals like Herzog. And I don't like to talk more because I know I have limited time. I have a lot of things, but let's focus about this story, and we can analyze and to talk about this genocide and about the implication of this genocide. Thank you so much.
I guess I'm really struck with the question that's behind us when you hear that personal story. I don't think there's a sensible answer to that question in the context of obviously the personal trauma that the humanity of what we're seeing overseas, and I don't think there is a sensible answer to the police violence, the fury in which the Min's government. There's a lot that's off kilter. So the risk is that anything I say is going to pale in comparison to the core of the story here. So I guess all I can do is, as a civil libertarian and as a lawyer, is speak to some perspectives that I think I've seen in terms of why Labor is taking the stance they're taking. But I guess, and I'm struck sitting so close to you, nothing really adequately answers, I think, that question in the context of the absolute horror that you've experienced personally and your family has, and quite frankly, far too many families around us. And I guess that's part of the story for me is, if you are going to take the approach you have, there's a tendency, an innate othering that you're doing, a dehumanization of a people. If you are able to take up that cause and try to silence the specific cause here. But I don't think that gets the full picture either, because this attack on protest and the criminalisation around policing didn't start with the Palestine solidarity movement. I think the climate movement has seen a big thing of this as well. And of course, we could trace it back to 78 and the other sort of history of terms of I guess, a general approach of governments in attacking this. But in recent history, it's also, I think, the climate movement as well as the Palestinian solidarity movement has seen a particular attack. So in that context, I think one of the perspectives here is a government that is inadequately responding to some, in inverted commas, complex problems in society. And as opposed to meeting the challenge that we think of, and maybe a West Wing-esque idealistic notion of government, an idealism, casting vision, trying to bring us forward as a community together to meet that complex challenge. We seem to have political leadership in this country that is absolutely taking a step back, taking really limited to no risk, is captured by capital, I think, in the way they're approaching this. And so they don't want to touch these complex issues. And again, there's nothing complex about the humanity in the stance that we're seeing. There's no complex decision. Sure, there might be some difficulties in trade negotiations and some awkward conversations that are supposed to be had with people that are otherwise our international friends. But that's the challenge you have to have when those circumstances arise, and we have a political leadership that is absolutely doing nothing about it. And I think that's the context that I see Min's in. I very much have my own experiences with sort of abusive white men growing up, and for various complex reasons that I'm certainly not going to get into. But I see that smacking of a person with a lack of capacity who can't meet a challenge before them and is calling for quiet and silence. And so you might have heard me in some of the circumstances using the analogy of an angry dad coming home and asking the kids to shut up. That doesn't get us to peace. That doesn't get us to social cohesion. That's not a happy family. That's a quiet one. And some of us probably know far too well it's actually a very damaged one as well. That's certainly not one that's getting unity going forward. So I think I see that as part of the context. We have a premier here who's asking the community just to shut up and go home. But more than that, he's enacting laws to make that happen as well. And that's horrific. And so what do we see? Well, we also see another vested interest that I think he's got some alignment with. And the last press conference about the making permanent the Operation Shelter, you might have seen the news about this. It's one of these things that the CCL is certainly finding it hard to keep up with the amount of rapid, regressive, fascist, quite frankly, changes that are happening. And it's every day. We have another one, and the one that most recently was 250 permanent cops with long-arm rifles that want to be a visible presence in your train stations and your places of worship. And it's in this media statement, their aim for this is social cohesion. And I not only, whatever the word that means, when the word peace has been there for a while, okay, so let's just keep using that one, I think, as a starter. And you'll always hear me try to do it. But on what planet does long-arm rifles walking past your local church get you to a place of peace and bring us to a place of calm? It's I'm so glad we've got that social cohesion because there's Sergeant there with a massive gun, so semi-automatic gun ready to take down. It feels like us, really. So, and in all that criticism around a police state and stuff, it just seems it's such absolute nonsense. But if you were following the submissions in the Pard case that's on, that's the reason. When you talk about a constitutional case, in their reply, the government has bold as brass said the legitimate purpose for which they think they want to pass these laws is social cohesion. That this part, it's as bold face as that social cohesion is the legitimate purpose. It doesn't make any sense. It's not good law, and it's just obviously not sensible. So we have a government that's operating out of its capacity. But if I could take it back to that media statement, the last two signatures with the quotes on the page were Mal Onion, in terms of supporting the government's decision, and then the Police Association, right there in the ministerial police statement. So look, I'm not sitting here casting a conspiracy theory, but we know Labor politics. We know we have the vested interests of three of the leading unions here. The PSA, the police, and the HSU have been in lockstep with the Min's government and have been three of the powerful voices here. The Police Association, through the Federation, has a vested interest in wanting to have more cops on the beat, having stronger, like any public service to a certain degree. And I think one of my recent comments of the media, if Min's funded health and education as furiously as he's funding the police, I think he'd get to social cohesion. I think we'd get there much quicker than he's doing it now. It'd be a glorious time, but he seems incapable of it. but there it is. We have, the Wanding laws that pass. It's the HSU, the PSA, and the Police Association come out and support that cause, support Minns in this sort of type of approach. And we're obviously supporting him politically in the background as well. So I think that's part of the contest about these vested interests. Of course, there are more vested interests, but in terms of the CCL, they're two of the main ones. The vested interest of a premier and, quite frankly, a cabinet that's incapable of meeting the challenge well at all, and also some of these vested interests in the power broking behind the scenes in the Labor Party about getting this forward. The last thing I'd like to say here is just about the problem we have in the way the caucus structure is happening and the cabinet happens in this state as well. The budget estimates has come out and seen, and look, we had 3 ministers of government sitting in cabinet that have all now on the record publicly declared that they did not oppose, and in fact in some cases actively supported, the PARD laws going through. And these are members of the so-called socialist left faction as well, and not to mention Jihad Dip. I don't understand how we have got to this place of complicity in the structures here. There's some relatively complex, boring issues that happened in the caucus meeting, which have meant that basically about 40 out of the 60 Labor caucus seats are captured by jobs, essentially. And only one person that I know of, Diadem, has principally come out and lost his job because of it, taking his stance on Palestine. There's a real problem in terms of the way our government is doing good governance in this state, and it's something I think not only now but in future governments we need to keep an eye on, because the structures are falling down a bit, and we're left to the Liberal Party, Susan Carter and Tudor Hope, who are quite frankly gloriously defending. The attacks have become so extreme that we found out what the Liberal Party is conserving. It's the structures of government. Who would have thought? Our democracy. But Tudor Hope and Carter are coming out and having to speak against basically the abuse on parliamentary process and the abuse on these processes. And I think that's a very dark day that's how far the inroads have happened. But I guess that's my ramblings for the moment.
Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm zooming in today from Gadigal land up north to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging across all the lands that people may be attending or zooming in from today. And that's a very important thing to highlight and a truth to ground ourselves in. First Nations people have always been at the forefront or borne the brunt of government restrictions and crackdowns. And I really take my hat off to Lizzie Jarrett's case in the Supreme Court today, which hopefully we'll hear a little bit about later on. I'd also firstly just like to preface, I'm by no means an expert at all on any of these topics, and I'll recognize that I do have a lot of privilege as a young white citizen of this country. So I'm very keen to hear about what other speakers have to say and what the audience may ask and what we can brainstorm tonight. Thanks very much to Green Left for putting this event on. But as Isaac said, I can definitely shed some light onto how these issues intersect with and manifest at higher education institutions, which we know are unfortunately a focal point of the government and lobbyists right now. So on that question, I think the same reasons why Labor is criminalising free speech has the same flow and effect for universities. There's kind of the longer term effects, which have started with the defunding and privatizing or corporatization of universities, which have made them more corporate entities run by business people, more focused on profit than student and staff satisfaction. So that's laid the groundwork for all the repressive policies and measures that we're seeing at the moment. And then in the short term, or more recently, the rhetoric of particularly the New South Wales government, but also the federal Labor government in terms of legitimising Gillian Seagal's report and the plan to do scorecards for universities, and the Royal Commission, which we have heard will shine a spotlight on universities, is just legitimising that rhetoric that somehow the horrific Bondi terror attack was caused by protests calling for freedom and justice on university campuses, which is just so far from the truth and really tells you how corrupt these governments and the people they're working with are. And in the same way that our government is taking all of these measures because of their capital interests and also their allyship with countries that they've cornered themselves with, like the United States and Israel, the same as our universities as well. Again, with that funding piece. Universities are now more interested in their investments and partnerships with things like Israeli universities or companies like Thales, who the University of Sydney has a memorandum of understanding with. So there's so many kind of elements going into these crackdowns on the freedom of speech, but it all goes back to, unfortunately, consecutive Liberal and Labor governments that have laid the groundwork for universities to be the spotlight of the crackdowns on the freedom of speech. And historically, we know that campuses have been hotbeds, rightfully so, for protest and progressive movements. There's young people who have left home for the first time, they're learning about the world, and they want a better future for themselves. That might be like May 68 is a common example. You've got the recent youth revolts in Nepal, or our encampments across university and college campuses over the last few years. So it makes sense that they're targeting university campuses to kind of try to wipe out that next generation of activists because, as Tim has said, they have this kind of fantasy that if you just stop people from talking, then it will be quiet. It doesn't mean that people won't stop having problems or that things will be socially cohesive as they're trying to say they will be, but things will be quiet. Because we are obviously embarrassing the government at the moment and our institutions. We're calling out their complicity in all of this and how they're not doing anything. And they're getting a bit more sneaky because of it. That's something I can talk a little bit more about tonight. And I guess where I have my experience and more expertise at the moment is what universities are doing at the moment. It's really focused on implementing the draconian policies that they've crafted and implemented over the last year and a half, because that's what the report cards and Royal Commission will likely be looking at in terms of they've got these policies, but now how are they implementing it and punishing the students that go against them. So we have been inundated recently with these policies and heavy-handed constant surveillance, including mostly on social media, misconduct notices, investigations, and other things with our student union. They've been digging around into the structure and the funding of our SRC, the Students' Representative Council, trying to say what we can and can't spend money on or associate with, which they do have some say over, I'll say. That comes from the kind of middle ground of the Student Services and Amenities Fund legislation. That was the kind of, middle ground between voluntary student unionism and what used to be the golden days of universal student unionism. But that being said, again, it's not social cohesion. Myself as a student union president, I just feel intimidated, constantly surveilled. All of our democratic rights and the normal activities we do on campus are under threat. If you follow the Green Left social media, you may have seen Isaac's video this week saying that they couldn't even put up a stall because they brought in these new policies a year and a half ago saying you can't put up your own stall, you have to book the space, but then you can't actually book the space in certain weeks of the year. So they're just trying to diminish all of these normal activities and the ways that students get involved with even clubs and societies, but particularly political organization, of course, through these repressive things. And with the Herzog visit last week or 2 weeks ago now, they had seen on social media, again, they've literally been stalking us, that we had planned to hire a bus to transport students between the Wollongong Wisley protest and Sydney's anti-Herzog protest. And then I got a letter forbidding us from doing that. So they knew that students were going in numbers, and obviously no one could have missed the amount of brutality and injuries that happened that night. But yet the university still hasn't said anything about it, which is a stark contrast to during the encampment when they would be sending nearly weekly notices about the psychosocial safety of students during a very peaceful encampment, but then when their students and staff are actively brutalized, protesting a war criminal, silent. So that's a little bit what's happening on university campuses at the moment, and it's very much related to what's happening in the past and currently with our Labor governments. And it will be a very interesting year because we also have things like staff enterprise bargaining at the University of Sydney and across a lot of other campuses this year. And I expect we'll see a lot of hypocrisy between the treatment of Palestine protesters and protesters during strikes and pickets for staff workplace conditions and rights. And that's something that I hope that a lot of the groups in this room will help us with and stand behind us when we face these attacks to student unionism, and our fight to stand with staff and our fellow young people across the globe, because we are mostly studying. We're reliant on the university for a lot of our funding, and it's contingent on ever more funny clauses and policies. So we're in a bit of a precarious position. We're strong and students are angry and incentivized to stand up, but there are definitely some drastic consequences, particularly for international students, that they're leveraging in terms of suspension that could lead to the cancellation of your visa. And as we saw with the case of Luna last year, that could mean a transgender person who's an asylum seeker in Australia going back to a place where they are in danger. But I think that's all for me. Not to leave on a sour note, but unfortunately that's the reality of the situation we're in at the moment.
Okay, so my name is Yehuda Aharon, and I am a Jewish Australian. I am a member of Jews Against the Occupation, and I've sort of been involved in the Jewish anti-Zionist movement in some sense for, I don't know, maybe like 10 years. So I'm not sure exactly, for a while, and active for a few years and then took a break. But come to 2023, it really became quite apparent that straight away that we needed to be active and we needed to make our voices heard. Until then, it sort of felt like, well, there's more pressing issues. Anything that we say or do over here doesn't change anything over there. And then I became aware of how involved and complicit the Australian government was, and so I became more active again. I would like to just acknowledge that I'm on Gadigal land, that I work and live on Darug land, that I move between Wangal, Bijigal, and Darawal country as well. And I want to pay my respects to all the Indigenous people who may be here or listening, and their past, present, and emerging leaders who have experienced a genocide that is, in many ways, one that mirrors what we're opposing now. And right now we're on ground zero. Australia is a settler colony. My knowledge of Israel as a settler colony and my learning of Israel as a settler colony happened at the same time as my learning of Australia as a settler colony, and I think that the two of them in my mind are intertwined. So yeah, there is no way other than liberation politics to challenge these two colonies, and ultimately there is no peace without justice in any land. So Jews Against the Occupation, just briefly, is an organization of Jews who oppose Zionism and the occupation. We changed our name, I believe, in 2023 to be Jews Against the Occupation 1948, to recognize the fact that we do not just oppose the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza in 67 borders, but we oppose the entire concept of Zionism and the Jewish state, as it is called, in its entirety. So we oppose that, and we stand against it, and we stand for a country that is not defined along religious, racial, or discriminatory lines. We oppose apartheid, we oppose the occupation, and we oppose the concept of Zionism as something that is inherently Jewish. Jews Against the Occupation began in 1988 with Women in Black in Sydney, and it was both Jewish and Palestinian women who were involved with that. So it's got a long history, and they've been involved for a long time. There is a lot of sadness with the fact that Judaism is conflated with Zionism, and the reality is Zionism is a modern concept that has been born in the 19th century of Europe, and it is a Eurocentric racist movement that attempted to deal with anti-Semitism through the concept of colonization, which was popular at the time. And the reality was that it was in great opposition to any established Jewish thinking of the time. The rabbis and the religious thinkers opposed it as heresy because we were forbidden from re-governing and occupying the land, the Holy Land, what was once upon a time the land of the Jewish people, but has been Palestine since forever, and the Palestinian people have been there for forever, there's a good chance that the people who Jews displace because of some sort of right of return are descended from Jews who have been there since the Bible anyway. But Jews are, according to the religious texts that I studied, that I grew up with, we're forbidden from occupying and governing that land. And then, so then Zionism happened because of this conflation of Judaism and a dual sort of loyalty, a loyalty to another place. And ultimately what we're seeing now with Zionism is this idea that Jews are loyal more to Israel and Zionism than they are to opposing I don't know, whatever the sort of the facts on the ground over here. So ultimately, if we are to oppose racism and anti-Semitism, we have to do so together. We do that here. We do not do that through moving somewhere else and displacing people in Palestine. But that was the original concept that gave birth to Zionism with Theodor Herzl and some guy in France who shares a name with, what was that? No, not him. He's the fascist Zionist, but I mean, nonetheless. Some guy in France that I can't think of right now, but that's okay. Anyway, the idea of Zionism was not an idea that was supported by Jews in lands outside of Europe. There were Jews in the Middle East, there were Jews in Morocco, and all of North Africa, as well as larger parts of Africa, all the way to India, and many of those Jews did not buy into the idea of Zionism as a colonial entity that was able to resolve whatever ideas or conflicts that they had with people within their own spaces. By and large, Jews in the Middle East and Arab countries, they did very well, and they looked upon the Jews of Europe as being downtrodden and persecuted, but they were flourishing. In Iraq, we had a flourishing Jewish community that has existed for thousands of years, and they did not buy into that. But the lie of Zionism is that Jews support the Israeli state sort of in their essence, when the reality of that history is not the case. That there is, even in Europe, there's a concept of the Bund, which was a labor union, a Jewish labor union, which believed in opposing anti-Semitism through solidarity with other movements, that we oppose any form of discrimination as it stands, where it stands, not by creating other problems elsewhere. The problem with all of this, and one of the reasons why I need to say it, is that it seems that the only way that we're able to counter this narrative of anti-Zionism, of anti-Semitism, is through hearing Jewish voices. And the sadness is that we should be able to hear the voices of people who are being killed and experiencing a genocide, and that should be ending our moral question on the issue. There is nothing about what happened in Bondi in Sydney that relates to Palestine. The reality is that the Islamic State and whatever the ideologies were that inspired that, they have existed since before 2023, and they have nothing to do with our protests. They have nothing to do with our fight for collective rights, and they have nothing to do with the genocide that Israel is perpetrating on the Palestinians and the apartheid that they instill in a state of peace. And the truth is, we shouldn't be asked questions of whether or not you support Hamas, when we should be asking those people in power whether or not they support genocide. But to me, something that from my thought was, and I don't have a reference to this, but somebody said it to me a while ago, that Jews are conditionally white, that we're white only as long as it suits the people in power and the oppressors. We're not people who are fully valued and present within the sort of within the racial hierarchy that sort of exists within the settler colonial states around the world, or whatever that sort of global whiteness is. We're only useful to them, and we're useful to them right now for shutting down protest laws that have been convenient for a long time, that we've seen a long list of governments looking to do. And the reality is that as soon as it's not convenient, they'll be happy to let us go. But for a long time, we've seen Palestine as the canary in the coal mine, where Jewish identity and Jewish safety has been weaponized in order to legitimize the global arms trade or our alliance with the US, which is the complex issue that actually we're all uncomfortable with the fact that we're in AUKUS, but we've got to toe the line. And that's the reality, is that Jewish safety is not being protected by any of these laws, and Jewish safety, or any safety, is not being made by people carrying long arms and weapons. We don't need more weapons. That's how people get shot. And the police cannot be trusted with weapons in our spaces, in community spaces, because they are more likely to kill people than any terrorist attack. So what am I trying to say? So I think that as somebody who comes from family who were German Jewish, who have history in the Holocaust, and somebody who's read a lot of literature in that space, to me, it's actually quite sickening to hear people utilize Jewish memory for the Holocaust in a weaponized way to talk about October 7, but not talk about the genocide that's happening now. And the reality is that the only way that we can commemorate the Holocaust is by standing against genocide. And that there should be nothing that is more powerful for a Jewish person to do than utilize the memory of the Holocaust to shut down further genocide. But instead, we're seeing people who say, how dare you invoke the Holocaust? And that is anti-Semitic, that they say that we're invoking the Holocaust. What a load of crap. Because the reality is the Holocaust was perpetrated against a range of people. It was perpetrated against socialists, queers, and the Romani people. It was not just perpetrated against Jews. Though we may have had the greatest number, we should stand against the genocide and the mass slaughter of any form of people because of our history, because of our past. And instead, we're seeing Jewish voices used to legitimize the erosion of our civil liberties. And the reality is that if we look to Nazi Germany, it was the erosion of civil liberties that creates the preconditions for further genocides and further violence. And although I don't envision that happening now, I do think not happening now in Australia. The reality is that instead we're using that to cover up our settler colonial past and the fact that we perpetrated a genocide against Aboriginal people here. So we are still using this genocide narrative to shy away from the truth. To me, I just wanted to reinstate my belief that I think that liberation politics is the only answer to anti-Semitism. We must stand with our Muslim, Aboriginal, people of colour, and queer people and every other people against every form of discrimination, instead of trying to pit one against another. That creates a mentality where some people's rights are more protected than others, that some people have the right not to face discrimination at the expense of others. And that is a load of crap. There is no way in which we can have our rights protected at the expense of another people. It has to be an egalitarian pursuit of liberty, and that is how we can create Jewish safety, instead of creating further scapegoating of Jews by blaming them for the erosion of civil liberties, which the reality is, I blame AUKUS. Thank you.
I also want to start with acknowledging that we're meeting here on the land of the Gadigal people, and land that was stolen, and sovereignty was never ceded. But in so saying that, we pledge our ongoing commitment to help in the struggle for justice. Well, the question we've been asked to discuss is why Labor, the supposed party of the working class, is criminalising freedom of speech and dissent. Why is it criminalising those who oppose Israel's genocide in Gaza while strengthening ties with the criminal Zionist government? Many of the reasons have already been put on the table, and I thank the other panellists for this discussion so far, and I think we can continue it productively tonight. I wanted to make a few points, but I want to first start also with the protests against Isaac Herzog. Probably lots of people in this room were there, and know will agree with what I'm saying, but it's sort of partly a one needs to go through this to sort of shake it off, because I've been at many protests and never before have I felt I wouldn't actually leave this one. So as you all know, some of us got there a bit earlier, and it really was a sort of carnival-like atmosphere at the very beginning. The Jewish Council of Australia had got the page of signatures out against Herzog's visit, and I met up with a whole lot of people that were saying, "Oh, I saw your signature, and I didn't know you were Jewish, and welcome to the club," and blah blah blah. There's a lot of sort of like common support and solidarity there, and I did notice that a lot of more elderly folk were there as well. And so I was really hoping it would be peaceful, because I was also aware of so many, I've never seen so many battalions of police and tactical response police, aside from the APEC protests maybe, but that was a long time ago. And it was peaceful until an order was clearly given for the police to unleash their violence. And now we know that the orders came directly from Minsk. Well, our protest, I think, along with so many others across the country, successfully sent a very loud message to the world that Labor doesn't speak for us. And post the terror attacks on Bondi and the so-called ceasefire in Palestine or in Gaza, the Palestine movement has not gone away. Labor had hoped that its state invitation to Herzog would allow it to ingratiate itself with the supporters of Israel following the terrible Bondi attacks. But this is not the case. I think a section of those people who may have been prepared to go along with Albanese's excuse that he was needing to help the community mourn are now, in fact, distancing themselves after the Min's unleashing of the violence, the police violence. As we know, Min's is now refusing to apologise, using the Law Enforcement and Crime Commission investigation as an excuse, while so many others, including that wonderful ex-cop from Illawarra, who put a testimony out saying she'd come to the protest with her partner and was absolutely horrified at what had happened. Well, the LEC investigation, which some could argue may have been caused just to release some pressure, may nonetheless be an opening to continue to pressure Min's from enacting similar laws to those being pushed through Queensland now, which criminalise speech on the basis of feelings being hurt or social cohesion, etc., or to make people feel safer. But actually I think watching Min's in the last 24 hours, he's not going to be holding back at all. We know from the last 2.5 years anyway that he has been he's been the premier trying to normalise relations with Israel. He has been the premier going out on a limb to say he supports Israel. We know he's the premier that is characterised by the Executive Council of Australian Jews or Jewry as a long-term friend. And we also know that he's been seeking to characterise the pro-Palestine movement from the beginning as being anti-Semitic. He has thrown everything at it, including, you will remember, misrepresenting New South Wales Police over the Dural caravan incident earlier last year. If you remember, he refused to... He used that incident to enact the first of his tranche of anti-protest laws, but he even contradicted the police that were trying to sort of basically hose him down and say, we don't have the evidence, we don't have the evidence. He overrode them, and he also stopped, I think, his officials from going to give evidence at the committee. He's made it clear where his loyalties lie. Let's put it there. But anyway, as you've heard from tonight, and I think everybody's experience has affirmed, Israel's war in Gaza has conscientised a younger generation to the bloody impact of colonisation. If at the beginning, 2.5 years ago, was a bit abstract for people, that is, we acknowledge country here, we do our best to understand the history, we read up on it, looking at a live stream genocide has got it clear in our minds, and I would argue pretty much the whole younger generation, what exactly colonisation looks like. I think it also explains why so many young people independently joined the rallies across the country over the last 2.5 years. And those people's consciences have pricked an older generation to also join in some of the very large rallies, for instance, the one over the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Well, the genocide in Gaza is backed, of course, as we know, by the United States, and it's a clear case of colonial oppression and expansion. Min's and Albanese's support for Min's and Albanese's support for Israel is not even framed as trying. This is the other outstanding thing, I think, to think about. Min's and Albanese's support for Israel is not even framed as trying to save Israel from itself, as some European leaders have sought to do. No, they are in lockstep with Israel, even if sometimes they pretend to show concern for starving Gazans. And we know they're in lockstep because of their unwavering political and material support for Israel. Well, why is Labor doing this? I mean, in the end, I agree with you. I think it's because a lot of it is down to Labor's support for the US military alliance, which AUKUS has definitely deepened, but it's in a long line of military alliances that both major parties support. It's dressed up as deterrence, but it isn't. It's about propping up the military domination of the richest part of the world. I think Australia is unlikely to want to take up Trump's generous offer of a place on the US Board of Peace, but its support for Israel's takeover of Gaza has been clear for more than 2.5 years by the continuing arms trade and, of course, the Herzog visit. Well, the bipartisan push for new hate speech laws, which also impact our right to political association, are the product of a racist view that the West needs a racist colonial settler state to protect its interests in the Middle East. While it's true that Western leaders don't always agree with Netanyahu's every move, it has maintained support for Israel, to save Israel. Using the World War II Holocaust as reason to condone another genocide is truly sickening, and it's another reason why so many Jews have pledged their support to the Free Palestine movement. What does Labor hope to gain from its adherence to the Zionist cause? To be re-elected, presumably, but on an even more racist conservative platform with some populist crumbs thrown in. Labor really does know how to deflect anger from people's real material concerns, which, as we know today, are cost of living and housing. They are the two big ones. And they know how to deflect, to channel that anger and frustration in a reactionary and racist way. The slow burn disengagement with the major parties means both are looking to blame others, the other. And we'll find out more about just exactly what this means in electoral terms after the South Australian elections, where One Nation's popularity apparently is going up very high. But we know it doesn't look good. So when the structural crisis of capitalism prompts people to turn away from the major parties, they then deploy their age-old tactic to distract. And racism, anti-Muslim racism and alleged anti-Semitism comes in very handy. Both distract, both apportion blame for any rise in anti-Semitism on those people standing up against genocide. And of course then we have the mainstream media, loyal servants to the 1%, have also played their role to fan the flames here of obfuscation and blame. But Labor is playing a dangerous game because sections of its base are Muslim and broader sections have been consciencised, even if we haven't seen the sort of active opposition to a genocide we would have, say, liked to have seen. For instance, you look at the Italian unions, played a fantastic role in demonstrating their support for Palestine. But other sections of Labor's base are simply fed up with the daily grind, and they might vote for One Nation, despite Labor using racism to try and keep them on side. Progressives in a country like Australia, a very rich country, already have a big struggle to win people to join movements for change in the first place. For most progressive people, politics is either a stunt arrests, clashes with the cops, or it's casting a vote for a major party at election time. But it's not. It's much more than that for the Socialist Alliance, and that's the reason why we focus so much of our work on building consciousness around state power and about building people power movements. The Palestine movement, in the end, has shown itself to be more resilient than perhaps people first thought. The openings are there to push back against Labor's criminalising of our protest rights, but only if we work together. Opposing Israel and Zionism is everyone's business because, among other things, it's affecting all our democratic rights to dissent and our freedom of speech. Thank you.
So my question really here is, those of us who experienced that brutality that night and witnessed particularly the young people coming out on the Tuesday night, just the young people on that night, I think there were, people don't talk about this, but there were at least 5,000, weren't there, or more on the Tuesday night. But obviously it was the police in concert with the Labor government who decided that night that that was the night that they would crush protest. The brutality was to crush us, like it was when I was young in 1978, up at King's Cross when New South Wales Police also tried to crush us. On the night in 78, I thought they had succeeded. We had 53 arrested, and on that night I thought we'd failed. But actually in 1978, there was an amazing several months of mass civil disobedience in this city. We thought we were crushed. We organised, we formed coalitions, many protests, hundreds more arrested at many more protests in August, September and so on. So my question quickly, sorry, I'll finish now. The question is, what do you think? Does February 9th and that police brutality spur us to resist further? Or is this authoritarian state government going to succeed and crush us?
After the big rally in the bridge, it was a strong message for everyone who tried to hide the truth. And then the Zionist movement started to pressure, to lobby the government in order to restrict this solidarity movement. And for that, we should focus and to think about the Zionist lobby and how this lobby is working. And all the time trying to change the facts, distort the reputation of the solidarity movement. And when I post something on my page on Facebook, I feel and I see people attacking without connected why they attacking. Then it started to say, you are against the Jewish people, you anti-Semitic, despite we are not talking anything about that. And they understand we are not talking about that, but they're trying to pressure us. I remember I wrote about when I subjected to racist attack just because we are wearing kufiya. They wanted to remove even our identity or to show our identity. Even the police said it was like a normal attack or normal assault, and they removed the racism in this issue. This is not like only to restrict the solidarity movement or the protest. This is like a strategy to stop people to say the truth. They don't want Palestinian issue to be like connected with justice. They wanted to connect Palestinian issue with terrorist action. And they pressure people, and for that they wanted to distort the truth because they don't want more people to join the solidarity movement because it's expand and expand. For example, in Manly, we have like now solidarity like Palestinian group, and every month we have event, and we find always people come and join us. And for that, Zionism is trying to pressure the government in order to stop us to say the truth. But we should be proud about what we achieved, because if we are not strong, they will not do that. But this means we have ability to challenge and face and confront the Zionist lobby and also the government, despite we didn't have anything. Just we believe that our issue is fair and we want to achieve justice. So we should not like be afraid. We should be proud, and I think they will not crush us. I am sure the solidarity movement will be stronger and stronger, and we will achieve our goals at the end, because future for people, not for governments or the criminals.
On the first one about the response to the February 9th Herzog rally, I agree that it was amazing to have so many people, particularly young people, turn up the next day at Surrey Hills Police Station. And I think that's not always a given. As the person who asked the question said, it could have turned into something like feeling that we were defeated or that there would be more violence faced that night. But I think a takeaway from things like the Bridge March last year and from the quick response of groups like left-wing political parties, the Council of Civil Liberties and legal observers right after the Herzog protest showed that we are on the right side, that there is power in numbers, and that we need to fight this in the streets and outside, not just through the court and legal system, which I think is something that we can take forward and apply to a lot of things at the moment in terms of the power numbers, and also not just assuming that people will know to do that they won't be scared, because that's exactly what the government wants and intended with things like the PARD and the violence that Minns instructed the police to enact on that Monday night. So there's a conscious effort there in terms of reminding people that we are all together and on the right side of history, but that's a great reminder of it works, and we just need to keep doing that to get people to come out and show that we'll have an effect on what we're doing and protecting our civil liberties. In terms of the hallucinogens of uni management, I thought was an interesting one, because they do seem like, you know, they're on another planet. They don't know what they're talking about. A lot of them are corporate business people who really don't really know about higher education. But at the same time, there is another sinister side. Like our Vice Chancellor, Mark Scott, was a former Liberal Party staffer. I think at his previous job, I think it was at the ABC or another news outlet, he was responsible for a lot of layoffs and job cuts. Like they do have these backgrounds, and they actually kind of, you know, they know what they're doing. Our Chancellor during the encampment was, or still is, I think, on the board of Tireless Australia. That they do have all these connections, and I think it's important to not forget that as well, that they're not people who don't know what they're doing, because they do, and they do have these connections, which they're actively protecting when they enact these policies and measures. And UCID, of course, is a more extreme case as Australia's first university and one of the group of 8, but that definitely pertains to all of them as well. I've kind of started thinking of it like the revolving door between the private and public sphere is more now like a 3-way revolving door between universities, lobbying, and government, which you can see with people like Julie Bishop down in Canberra and things. And then also lastly, to touch on the IHRA, or the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, that is definitely a worrying thing. I noted that as well reading about the first hearing or session of the Royal Commission the other day, because the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism has been a massive topic at universities over the last 10 plus years, because I think of the 11 examples that they give of anti-Semitism, I think 7 are related to Israel, which is pretty ludicrous that it's mostly focused on protecting the state of Israel instead of actual Jewish people. But it's interesting because there are a lot of definitions of anti-Semitism. Our university uses a different one that was developed by Universities Australia, which in some respects is worse, but it's not the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism because they thought that that actually would be in breach of academic freedom. And that's something I've been toying with as well, if it would be worth amongst our groups having a particular definition of anti-Semitism that we subscribe to or say. I think it's pretty easy just to say that it's not anti-Zionism and it is things that target people based on their Jewish faith or identity. But this is also something I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on. But if they're able to cherry pick and then weaponize particular definitions of anti-Semitism, maybe that's something that we should be thinking about as well.
I think obviously fantastic questions. Because as a lawyer, Peter, hallucinogenic substance, I'd suggest you go to your doctor and get some legally surprised one, subscribed ones, if legal, of course. But I guess I find it interesting because I think it comes into that connection of othering as well. This idea that you're picking up on something, that there is this madness here. There's an absolute hallucinogen is the right, and I wonder. I hypothesize about the involvement of big tech here in terms of algorithms and the cooking of the minds of some of our friends and loved ones in terms of picking up perspectives, adopting really dehumanising views of other people. And I wonder, because I know it's been in some of the commentary about whether that's happening with some of our politicians as well. They're in their echo chambers of an algorithm that they're taking up these views, and it boggles the mind. And I think that the question of othering has come up a few of the speakers here. And I mentioned it as well in my introduction. I think it's a really important one. And it's a dangerous one, as has been said, because if you continue to other, ultimately you are taking up the strategy that One Nation is taking up as well. So the othering that Minns is doing in the dehumanisation of protesters and activists is a river running the same course as the one that One Nation is running at, the deeply more transparently racist one that One Nation is going on. So I think we have to call it out, because otherwise we're going to lose a bigger game here. But we have to call out Labor's complicity in that same strategy as well. The silencing of a specific subset of our community, the oppression on specifically Arabic speech, which is coming up, the specific silencing of the Palestinian solidarity movement, the support of that cause, the Iranian one as well. This is racist. There's racist undertones here, if not explicitly. And so we need to draw attention to the othering and speak it out, which then I think leads into maybe the more positive, where do we go here? What can we do about making things more imperialistic? I am a fundamentally richer person for the diversity of people in my lives, that I've lived that life of going out into the world, meeting people from different perspectives. I am truly a richer person. It's not a lie we're telling ourselves. I am stronger for it. And I think if we can tell that narrative in creative ways, if we can use maybe tech smart to tell these stories, Mark's experience in terms of linking the 78ers to the protests, we did that as well. We think Peter as well from the 78ers as well. Linking what's happened here is very similar to what's happened in 78. Telling those personal stories and about how, while this movement against protest isn't against us, it was against us 50 years ago. And it could be you tomorrow, I think helps link this broader group that, despite the attempts of people to other, it's all of our rights. And that gets to, I think, as well, Arlo's point about the public assemblies and their impact. Protests are meant to be disruptive. They are by their fundamental nature disruptive. We have a right to assemble. We have a right to politically communicate with each other. And if you accept that, then that's sort of the beginning and the end of the story. We then should be able to, in our democracy, get out on the streets. And why I think that's particularly problematic, or it's an interesting point, is that, and I think Jews Against the Occupation, their vigils were a really great example about this. I mean, the grief that I felt at what happened in Bondi, it was obviously it was horrific. I don't know about you all, but I guess as a civil libertarian and as someone who's in a specific role, I also had this heart drop moment where it's like, oh God, what is the government going to do with this moment as well? And it's part of my role. And I can set it aside for a moment and go, just process what's happening. And then I think within 24 hours, Min starts pushing. And then there's this double grief then about we have a government that's using this moment to really oppress people. And so why I highlight that is because the act of assembling in the Jews Against the Occupation vigil, meeting people eye to eye, processing that double grief about what happened in Bondi and the grief about our government was an act of healing and a profound one for me that I found really helpful. So again, that's a practical, we can talk about our right to assembly in the abstract, but it's a practical benefit of us meeting each other, looking at each other eye to eye, and growing as a community from that as well. So yes, it might be disruptive, but as sections of our community, we grow from it, from these experiences. They have these practical. So linking up to the practicality, I think, is important and helps us, go against this dehumanization that's been part of the rhetoric. But what I'm trying to highlight here as well is, in trying to suppress our ability to communicate, in trying to suppress our ability to assemble, they're also suppressing our ability to go against these technocratic algorithms that dehumanize, that go against, like stepping out the front door, walking, speaking to Peter face to face, or Mark, or any of us, Rachel. It removes the ability for us to the other interests try and dehumanize, because we know it can't be right because Rachel's lovely. I meet her face to face, and I have that. So I think we need to be really vigilant about not letting that be eroded, because in this horrible world we're seeing, where we're seeing an increasingly less humanization, this horrible influence of big tech and algorithms. We must be able to walk out the front door to each other, gather as a group, and fundamentally, as a part of our humanity, look at each other in our eyes as brothers, sisters, siblings, and know that we're in this great thing cause together, moving in the same direction. So I think we should be really cynical about the attempts in this broader context of where our world is going. But also, I think there's the role in the tech as well as addling the minds and getting people off centre. It's the only reason. I struggle to contemplate, and you'll have seen Civil Liberties make a point about Catley backing the cops. She's the socialist left member for Swansea, isn't she? I'm from Belmont, like Macquarie, like she's the daughter of an MUA, and she's saying back the cops. Like, how do we get here? How do we get here other than there is some other thing that's happening, hallucinogen, that's sort of is cooking the minds as we go there. And so I guess I come back to Mark's point here. And I think this is why his story and the story of the 78 is important, is because they thought they were crushed. And their story was that they absolutely weren't. And we're about to see, in 2 years, 50 years of a celebration of that moment and what it's meant for inclusivity. And I think we saw it straight away. CCL came out straight away, but we weren't alone. We all came out straight away. And Mins and Catley and the rest were on the hop. They try to spin a lie, and if you see the social media numbers, CCL's had 800,000 engagement over the month of 30 days, since we've had these sort of huge numbers of engagement of people with our media. If we can get those stories out, we can do it smart. I think we turn this into a moment where, and I think Palestine Solidarity Movement and climate change do this, where this isn't the end of our democratic, this is the moment in which we marked and solidified that we have to protect these rights, and we turn this ship around. It's not going to be easy, we're not there yet, but I absolutely believe it has the potential to do that, and also to be, I guess, that opposition to imperialism. So I guess, just in case, because I've spoken for clearly far too long, and I obviously won't get the mic again, I think there are some active campaigns. Pip is pulling the lead as we speak. No, I could feel the draw of a much better speaker about to speak. That's what it is, the gravity of handing it over to someone who's my better. I think there's Human Rights Act campaigns at a federal and state level that are on the hook now. We turn this into a narrative about, it's not just our rights about protest or speech, it's about all our rights, including religion, if we want to go to peace, which might be a controversy, including religion, including having broad accessible rights. We move positively towards a step in that direction now, which is what's also abhorrent about what Mins is doing now, that in the context internationally, Trump, ICE, that he's taking that step in that police brutality way. We need to, as a movement, turn it around and say, no, we need to show, even if you have absolutely criticisms about the strength of a Human Rights Act, what a great opportunity for us to take a positive step in the right direction, just to at the very least flag, symbolically maybe, but it's an important symbol, that together we're in this together, let's protect all our rights. And I think it has the added benefit of adding into the discourse and public education a rights focus, because all of the public service will have to have human dignity and human rights at the front of their... maybe that will help us move in a direction where, because we're seeing it in this addling of the minds, our community is forgetting what it is to be in a democracy and what our rights are. So let's move in that direction maybe.
I guess out of all the questions, I also want to talk a bit more about the "they haven't crushed us" question, because I think that's what we're here for. They haven't crushed us, definitely not. But the fear is real, and their weight is real. So I don't want to be a dampener on things, but I think we have to actually, as my daughter likes to remind me, not everybody lives in the inner west, Mum. I think it's a sort of important reminder that Minns and Catley and everybody else is pitching at the disengaged, partially terrified, struggling to get through the daily, weekly, monthly grind, and they don't actually know that much about the Middle East. They've seen the news, they can't avoid it, but they don't know much. Having dinner with my cousin the other day was a bit of another reminder that, 2.5 years of genocide, you think it goes off on everybody's screen. It doesn't. So the reason I'm saying that is that I think our reach has been good. That is the broad pro-Palestine movement, the progressive, and the comeback from Bondi was pretty amazing, I think, too. Actually, I think the reaction to Bondi showed what social cohesion is about. That is, everybody said, this is terrible, we do not support it, we stand with the community. It was an outpouring from every single quarter. Minns could learn a few things from that too, but didn't. Just sought to weaponise the whole thing. So, but I do think the Herzog protest, as I said before, I think it showed that the movement hasn't gone away. It is prepared to fight back. But without institutional support, and we don't have much, it's going to be very hard. I mean, I was active during the Iraq, opposition to the Iraq war, and before that Afghanistan. The trade unions were there in battalions. We had faith groups there in battalions, I mean, once the occupation was okayed by the UN, then they started to drift away. But nevertheless, before the invasion, you had that feeling like you had your back covered. Now, there's not that feeling anymore. It's down to us. It's down to people like us. And more than people in this room, obviously. There's lots of us, but we're pretty disorganised, to be honest. I'm just putting some hard truths out there because I think we have to wrestle with this. And while I appreciate that, we need to be optimistic because we have to be, it is a difficult time for us, for our side, if you like, because they're not going to stop. And you can just see semi-automatic rifles. I thought you might know. I thought the Tasmanian gun law reform outlawed police having semi-automatic rifles. Maybe I'm wrong. But for Minns to take that step, to give semi-automatic, because police only have guns which are not semi-automatic, as far as I understand. You have to shoot one bullet at a time. You can't go... We should look into this, because if this is the case, this is like... maybe Victorian police have it already, but this is a big step in the wrong direction, and we need to interrogate it. We need to resist it, obviously. Just on the Royal Commission into anti-Semitism, even from the first session, you just think this is a stitch up. When we all heard that, when Albanese had resisted to some extent and then he just turned around, I did think, well, he's got a plan then. He's got a plan with this commission. And to hear the commissioner say, actually, I'm going to put my recommendations forward in 4 weeks' time, and then we'll go and take evidence to look at the background and the context and everything else that led to the Bondi attacks, really got me suspicious. You've got a plan already, and it's been given to you by Gillian Siegel, perhaps. Maybe. I do think because it is a commission, we should be encouraging people to submit. I do think we've got to take advantage of that democratic space, if you like, but I'm not hopeful because I do think they're going to just be following the invoice plan, more or less, and the using the IHRA definition. Although I think there's some caveats been placed on that too. Maybe you know more about that, but I understand that she's tried to sort of couch that in some sort of trying to make out that it's not controversial, that she's using a controversial definition of anti-Semitism. Anyway, a lot of people are just going to switch off. So she'll come up with a plan. It'll be discussed from April, let's say, through to December. We'll have the plan, it'll dominate all the news, all the premiers will get on board, that's another area we've got to be organised to push back on as well. And lastly, I'll finish and just say we've all got to be difficult. We've got to be difficult, doesn't matter what your gender. Grace Tame's difficult. We appreciate her for being difficult. By the way, she gave a fantastic speech at the Herzog rally. We've all got to keep being difficult.
I wanted to jump straight onto the question about what we've won as well. I think that when I think about that, I would start with, like, in Palestine, what have we won? I think that ultimately we will win that war. We will win that ideological anti-colonial war. And the reality is that that there is no movement for national liberation that ever seems to... You cannot squash national liberation. That when there is a people who is oppressed, you cannot do anything other than at some point recognize it. And to me, I think of a volcano. You cannot plug a volcano with a cork. It just will not happen. This will never end until Palestine is free, and Palestine will achieve that freedom. How long that will be, I'm not sure. I think... when I think of, like, the Sharpeville massacre in '68, and then I think about, like, the UN creating an official sort of sanction against South Africa, I think in sometime in the 70s. It took at least 20 years before apartheid fell, and now we're seeing a sort of a decline in the sort of international value and power of those international organizations. So it's difficult to really say what will happen. But the reality is that Israel will either self-combust by its own problems that it has created and manufactured through its own deals with like the most radical fascists in their own parliament or their own military poison, or the ultra-Orthodox who will also... Anyway, one way or the other, either we will win because Palestine will achieve the sort of the recognition that it deserves, or Israel will combust and Palestine will be what remains. So that's my belief about the future there. I don't know if that works. But then over here in our protest in Town Hall against Herzog, I think that we won. And I think that we've been marching week on, week out for over 2 years, and we've not got any media attention. By and large, the media has ignored us. By and large, they sort of treat us as a status quo, as something, okay, well, there's going to be a ragtag bunch of inner West lefties who are going to be there. The reality is we've been across the country. We've been in country New South Wales, we've been in Newcastle, we've been in Wollongong, we've been in Sydney. And the truth is, they prefer to act as though we are not there. And the media has treated us that way. But after Herzog was here, after we saw that police brutality, we controlled the media space. And we were able to control that narrative. The government was on the back foot. And though they may increase their shutdowns of our right to protest, I still think that we will win that as long as we control that space. And if they shut that down, if they police it, it is not fair to the people who will suffer. And as a able-bodied man, I got knocked around and I was at work the next day. Not everyone was that lucky, but for the movement, they cannot stop us. And we see this also in the UK. Palestine Action is now back on. So Yeah, it's all back, baby, and now the government looks like a fool. I mean, I cannot really think how I'm not following UK politics, but I can't imagine how Starmer is spinning that narrative. And ultimately, they cannot shut us down, and we will be winning that on the streets, especially if we are being disobedient, causing trouble, making things difficult for them. And I think that also with that, we also have to reach to the disengaged youth, because they are seeing this genocide on social media, live streamed, but they're not necessarily all knowing how to get active and get involved. And ultimately, if we are able to make that splash, that is powerful. Wanted to talk about just the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So I don't think that there's an intellectual, judicial, academic, or anti-discriminatory body in the world that backs the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, except for organizations that are inherently Zionist in their constitution, like the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, and these sorts of organizations that sort of position themselves as voices of anti-discrimination or Jewish sort of community governance, when in reality they are Zionist organizations to their core. The reality is, even the creator of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism quit and disenfranchised and distance himself from that definition, because the reality is it muddies the concept of the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and he recognized that it would be a greater disservice to the safety of Jewish people to advance that definition. So it's absolute bogus. It has not a shred of historical basis to stand on, and it has no backings of anyone with any values.
And the courts have been interesting, because I think the courts are important space to contest, but they are against us by and large. I mean, at the moment, they're not so much against us. They're ruling in favour of environment activists in front of court. And by and large, we are winning on the Palestine cases, by and large. But as there's a great El Salvadorian poet, every time I go to court, I remember his poem, "The rich make the law, only the poor follow the law. When the poor make the law, the rich will be no more." And yet, every time you go to court, you're just reminded how patronising and undignified the process is. These young people coming with bail conditions to get them, this poor guy who had to move house had bail conditions from the ICC protest. He had to go to court to say, I have to move house. I mean, it's just ridiculous, but it is this attempt at silencing. Okay, my point being is that I think we have to think about how to advance the movement in this current phase, and the whole united movement, broad coalition, democratic space, town hall meetings. We're not quite there yet. And I want to ask a few people, I mean, I know we're entering the end of the... How do we get to this point? How are we organising in this space here? We're all in agreement. We need a united movement that's democratically functioning. That's going to empower the people, energise the movement on an ongoing level, and that will force the unions and the churches on side. Okay, we're all, yes, but how do we do it right now in February 2026?
I think, Tom, your assessment's spot on, mate. I think that's exactly what's happening. And you're right to highlight Dural. We all sort of highlighted Dural. It's a great example about how the narrative just keeps moving on, which is more like an obnoxious thing after another. So let's keep not forgetting this sort of litany of woes, because the Premier's, I think, leading up to a law and order election. So let's highlight how they don't even do law and order very well at all. But I just to clarify, just a correction, my one correction to you is that it's not actually in the PARD that it's in the special events power in terms of the liability restriction. But Peter O'Brien's solicitors and other solicitors are out there saying, forget that. If you think you've got something, come to us and we'll make it happen, because it's all about whether or not there's a question about whether or not it's in good faith that they've done that, and that's something you should seek legal advice about to get that question. And I think the Moree drones thing absolutely connects to that broader question about what the role that police have, and I think we need to beef up LEC, make it more transparent generally, have more, outside of the sort of policing community in and around that, because police, I think, have far too much, or far too little oversight, independent oversight. And while the LEC is independent, that's all it does day in, day out. You want to have, I think, a broader sense of community that are observing what's going on and a part of that process. I think I just echo the calls of others to say, I think as much as there's obviously a problem with the adoption of the definition in the anti-Semitism inquiry, Bell has already indicated a problem with that. There's a complicity there. It smacks to me of the fact that she's been told she has to use that definition in the process and she doesn't want to. So give her ammunition to come to a different conclusion. She's a black letter lawyer judge. It's been a problem in the progressive movement. She's not nearly as progressive as the right-wing media suggests she is in terms of that. Give her material, though, to call out the problems with it if you're part of groups that are submitting as well. I might stop there.
Yeah, I'll just address some thoughts about where to go to from here. I mean, I think we have to all collectively draw breath and try and launch a be more united in reality. And we all know, without going into detail, there are some big divides in the movement and almost a little bit of competition in the organised part of the movement. And I think perhaps post-Herzog actually affords an opportunity to actually someone, probably not us, probably more like Tim's group or Jews, combined with Jews Against the Occupation, 48 and a union and maybe Labour Against War, call a big public meeting and actually have a real discussion about how we can make the movement more cohesive, and then actually make it a productive meeting, like having unions saying, okay, I'm here, I noticed the NTU was there this morning, we are going to do X, Y and Z in the union. Because we got to realise this pushback is not just the semi-automatic rifles. This is inside the ABC. The Rural Affairs reporter told me yesterday they are getting the law on how to report on Israel, Palestine. I mean, it's everywhere. It's at every level, not just university schools. It's everywhere, as we know. So I think that, out of this room, perhaps hopefully this may have sparked a bit of interest in this going forward. But I think everyone is talking about it. I actually spoke to someone from Labour Against War the other day who's saying, muttering and grinding his teeth. And I said, hang on a minute, yes, you're right, but don't forget, where are the unions? Where are the big swathes of where are the, where are the people with institutional weight right now when we need them? So anyway, I don't think we want to pull everyone together, not point fingers, but I think that those with a little bit more purchase authority, we need to have a little collective discussion about, or they need to have a little collective discussion, we could have input into some next steps. And I do think that a lot of people are scratching their heads now, because I don't think what is happening right now is going to be sustainable, not with the pushback that we're finding.
It's a tough question to think about where to next, and I agree with the other speakers that there sometimes can be issues amongst organisations, and I remember thinking I got in this to try and fight against genocide and Zionism and the right, and here I am kind of putting all my energy into fighting leftists. But really, I think that we think that we're disorganized and we could be more unified. But the reality is that anybody who's involved with an organization that enacts change is doing something, and doing that and being a part of that organization is what matters. Not about whether or not they don't agree with another organization that is also making change. We are making change in our spaces, in our organizations, within our networks, and we can and should do more. And we should strive for doing more, but not to get disillusioned with the fact that just because we're fighting with another group that has a different ideological perspective or definition of something does not mean that we're being ineffective, and does not mean that therefore that we should feel disillusioned with where we are now because of that. keep our head on the game, stay focused on whatever the thing is that we're doing, and know and believe that we're making change and we're going to win it at some point. I don't know what else. I think I do also think that a lot of people have said that, you know, they've done this to climate protesters, and that what we're seeing now is a continuation of that. But I think that it really has to be said that the suppression of free speech on Palestine has been decades long, and is really kind of a separate issue. I think that what we're seeing in the criminalisation of protest is something that we're seeing this confluence of these two factors. But this suppression of people being able to speak out on Palestine has happened for a very long time. I know in my time, Jumana Bayer, who was a lecturer of mine at Macquarie University, has now lost her job. But for over a decade, she has faced constant scrutiny by Zionists and people who seek to protect the status quo for her positions on Palestine. And this is something that we see the world over, including in the ABC with John Lyons, who wrote about the fact that it is the most difficult thing to report on. So I just feel like that's worth mentioning. And yeah, we're seeing the two things, the two ugly heads join, but nonetheless, I think of them separately.
I think touching on what we said before, it's a mixture of giving people the confidence to protest and to get organised and to know that it makes a difference, but also at the same time not losing sight of who we're fighting for and what we're fighting against, which I think what Shamikh has offered to the panel is a really pertinent and somber reminder that the genocide is ongoing, and it's not just about our rights, but also a genocide and ethnic cleansing, which may be many, many kilometres away, but it does impact every facet of our life and some people's families directly as well. And it's hard to balance that. And I know for young people particularly, which has been brought up a few times tonight, it's really hard, particularly because there's cost of living and housing crises. Students are on campus less, they're working more, they live further away from campus, and there is that culture of mostly engaging with these things online. And admittedly, that's kind of what I did for the first 2 years of my university life, which I obviously regret now, but there wasn't, at the time, it didn't seem like there was an alternative or something else to do. So I think providing those avenues is something that's important, giving people the confidence, and with people's schedules and different abilities, particularly if there's, say, international students worried about visa requirements and things, providing different levels and ways people can get involved. And I think that's relevant to working people and people with families as well. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, but there's different things that you can and should be involved with. Yeah, and that reminder as well in the back of our minds that the criminalisation or the targeting of even from the river to the sea in Queensland is something that could feasibly be coming for us next in New South Wales. So it's not a time to be complacent by any means, or for business as usual. And I think events like this are really great, but also noting there's, you know, other groups that have their own meetings tonight talking about the same thing, and unity and coming together is a lot easier said than done. So it will take some hard assessment of where we're at, what we can do, and who might be in the best place to kind of lead that collaboration, as Pip said. But I think it's definitely time for that to happen.
Thank you, Rachel, for your important question. Honestly, this is the most important point in this event. I think the next forum should be about this question, because we want to continue. We don't want just organize forum, and when we reach some important conclusions, and then we don't continue. So please, it's important to organize a forum to discuss, because this need to prepare more, not only just to answer the question. And if we organize something like that, we can talk about different levels in the media, about how to protect protesters, our rights and refuting the claims of the government and Zionists. And this question important for me also, because when I had when I subjected to racist attack, honestly, at the beginning I was confused. What can I do? And when I went to the police and didn't know what's the next, always we should answer what's the next. And we should think how to protect protesters. For me now, after the police didn't acknowledge that there is racist attack, this is a big question. And now I will continue and I will start campaign in order to discuss the gap in the law regarding attacking Muslims or attacking Palestinians. They are not like classified that racist action or racist attack. So I will start a campaign, and we should not fight like individuals. It's important to be in unity and to support each other. And sometimes we need consultations, we need support. So it's important next forum to be about that. And just to tell you something which is positive, I am in contact with Palestinians in Gaza and Palestinians around the world, and they are happy that Australia became as one of the countries. They have a strong movement to support Palestine, because so far from Palestine, and we didn't know anything about Australia before, a little bit, but even when I have invited to come to Australia by Socialist Alliance, I remember I met Nicole 13 or 14 years, and when he invited me to come to Australia, so long distance, and so but we should be proud that we achieved something important. And for me as a Palestinian and my friends, we are proud about solidarity movement. And I am the only Palestinian here. When I see from all the nationalities, from different backgrounds, support Palestine, and they are not Palestinians, that's so important. And for me, this give me hope to continue, and which is important. And I think the resistance will continue, and we will achieve our goals at the end. Thank you.